In this presentation, I'm going to talk about Singapore Payment Services Act licenses, which are the licenses under Payment Services Act. My name is Vaibhav Joshi and I'm director and founder of Singapore Compliance Consulting Firm. So let's proceed ahead. And this is the first presentation in a series of three different presentations. So in this presentation, we are handling PS Act licenses basics. The next presentation will be standard payment institution and major payment institution licenses, application procedures and the documentation that you need to prepare, especially in the side of manuals and AML CFT policies and enterprise-wide risk assessment. And the last presentation in this series will be for standard payment institution and major payment institution, some practical considerations and frequently asked questions. So the agenda for this specific presentation, first we will discuss about Payment Services Act. Then we will discuss about activities covered under Payment Services Act, three types of licenses under this act and some example companies. And then we will also go through the basic requirements that you must fulfill before you can make application under this act. So first of all, some basics. Payment Services Act was passed in the Parliament of Singapore in 2019 and it became applicable from January 2020. So this is relatively a new legislation, but it has been actually created by combining two separate acts, which were Payment System Oversight Act and Money Changing and Remittance Business Act. So previously these two acts were managing the activities related to payment services. So what is the rationale why this new act was created and why we did not continue with the old regime? So in last few years, Singapore has experienced a significant development on fintech area. So there are a lot of companies in the fintech segment which are bringing new technological innovations in financial applications. Maybe it is related to fund management, maybe it is related to remittances, maybe it is related to electronic money, maybe it is related to cryptocurrencies. So there are lots of options now being explored by the businesses. And it was felt that to manage that properly, a new act, a new regulatory framework is required, which can effectively manage the varied scope of various fintech activities. So, with that objective, these two previous acts were kind of merged into this new Payment Services Act. So, moving on to next slide, what are the activities then covered in this Payment Services Act? So here I am showing you a screenshot that I have taken from the Monetary Authority of Singapore website. And basically there are 7 activities which are coded here as activity A to activity G. If you are or if your business is providing any of these services, then you will be required to obtain a license under Payment Services Act. So let's go through briefly about these activities. So activity A is about account issuance services. So if your business, if you issue any kind of payment account where a person can keep some money, maybe $100, $500, $1,000, kind of an e-wallet, and then can use it for payment of services or maybe for transfer to somebody else, then that comes under account issuance services. The next activity, activity B, is domestic money transfer, which I think very clear from the name itself. If you are making any kind of monetary transfer within Singapore, then this activity B is the category. Activity C similarly is a cross-border money transfer. So if you are providing any services, either inbound or outbound, for remittance of services but out of Singapore, then in that case, that activity will be called as activity C, which is cross-border money transfer. Activity D is merchant acquisition services. So while the definition given is slightly confusing, what it basically means is an online payment gateway. If you are providing any online payment gateway for processing of a payment of credit card, debit card, or any other such a card, then in that case, that activity will fall under this category. Activity E is e-money issuance services. So issuing e-money to allow the user to pay merchant or transfer to another individual is an activity that will be covered here. So there is a slight difference between activity E and activity A, which I have explained in the last presentation in this series in FAQ section. Activity F is the digital payment token services. So if your business provides storage, buying or selling of digital payment tokens, what we typically call it as bitcoins or cryptocurrencies, then this is the activity in which that business will be classified. And the last activity, activity G, is money changing services. So if you are a money changer and you buy and sell foreign currency note, then you will fall in this category. So as I mentioned, if your business is providing any of these services, then you come under the purview of Payment Services Act and you will have to obtain the necessary license. So what are the different types of licenses under Payment Service Act? So there are 3 licenses. First is Standard Payment Institution License or a Major Payment Institution License, and another one is Money Changing License. So if I pull back the previous screenshot, activity A to activity E typically either come under Standard Payment Institution or Major Payment Institution, whereas Money Changing License is related to activity G. Normally this money changing license tend to be independent one, only dealing with activity G. Activity F is a unique here, which is for cryptocurrencies, but as of now, no company has been issued this license till date. So government authorities might be still checking about how and what impact the cryptocurrencies can have and how those can be regulated properly. But the primary focus of discussion for this presentation is on SPI and MPI, that is Standard Payment Institution and Major Payment Institution, because most of the fintech companies come under this criteria. Moving on to the next slide then, what is the difference between Standard Payment Institution and Major Payment Institution? So actually there is not much difference. Both of these licenses are very similar. The application process is very similar. The documentation required is also very similar. However, a standard payment institution has a limit on the monthly transaction they can carry out. And that limit is as follows. It can carry out maximum Singapore dollar 3 million monthly transactions for any payment services other than e-money account issuance and money changing. Singapore dollar 6 million monthly transactions limit for 2 or more payment services, again other than e-money account issuance and money changing services, and Singapore dollar 5 million of daily outstanding e-money. So if your company or if your business is likely to cross this threshold, then you will have to compulsorily go for major payment institution. Otherwise, a standard payment institution license is enough. Obviously, there are some differences between SPI and MPI as to the requirements as well as about the stringentness of the AML CFT and other policies. So moving on to the next slide now, one key point you should understand here is the businesses that comes under Payment Services Act for licensing purpose can be of very wide scale. For example, on one end, you may have a taxi company like Uber, which has its own app, maybe Android app, and through that app, it issues accounts to the subscribers to keep some small amount of money, maybe like $100 or $200. And the customers can then use this money to make the small payments at supermarket or even to pay for the taxi bills. So this is a very small activity, to be frank. Now compare this with the second example, which is of a remittance company. Let's say that remittance company is Niam, and workers in Singapore remit usually less than 1,000 at a time to their home countries. For example, there are a lot of workers who are transferring money to Philippines, maybe to Indonesia, China, and India. So they need some better options for remittances, and rather than using banks where the exchange rates are not very favorable, they might use this kind of company. And let's take the last example, which is of a major payment institution, maybe Aspire or Revolut, which issues a business account, and the business account do not have any limit. So business account can keep maybe $1 million and make the payment of $200,000, $500,000 for a single invoice. So if you really see the complexity of policies and the AML and CFT requirements or AML and CFT risk for these three companies are at a different level. Obviously, for a taxi company, it is very low. For a remittance company, it is medium. And for a major payment institution, it is quite high. So what this actually means is your compliance policies, manuals, AML CFT checks, whatever you design as required under this act must be commensurate with your business scope and operations. Obviously, the AML and CFT policy of a taxi company cannot suit a major payment institution and vice versa. Now, this compliance policies manuals we are going to discuss in presentation number 2. So now we will go through the basic requirements which you must satisfy or which your business must satisfy before you can apply license under this act. So the first requirement is that you must be a Singapore registered entity. So this is a basic requirement, and you can register a private limited company. So if you are a foreign based service provider and want to expand in Singapore, then you can create a subsidiary company or you can even register a branch. The next requirement is you need to have enough base capital, and the base capital requirement as mentioned under the act is your capital must be minimum 100,000 Singapore dollars for a standard payment institution and 250,000 Singapore dollars for a major payment institution. In addition to that, you must provide a bank guarantee, which is required only for major payment institution, and it is either of 100,000 Singapore dollars or of 200,000 Singapore dollars depending upon your transaction volume. The bank guarantee can be provided by putting up a bank deposit in a bank and then getting a guarantee, or in some cases you may be able to buy an insurance policy from third party insurance providers for this activity. The next requirement is that you must have a secured occupied office which is independent and not a co-working space. So your office should be a separate one. It must be securely locked where your books of accounts and systems can be kept. A service office is okay, but a co-working space is not acceptable. So within a service office, you need to have an independent unit which is locked by you and it is accessible only to your staff. In addition to that, during the normal business hours, there should be somebody present at your office to answer any public or any question that may somebody bring to you. Now continuing on basic requirements, you need to have minimum number of directors in your company in Singapore. So you need at least one executive director who is either a Singapore citizen or a permanent resident. And if you do not have Singapore citizen or a permanent resident, then you need at least one executive employment pass holder as a director, plus one non-executive Singapore citizen or a permanent resident as a director of the company. Your directors must meet fit and proper criteria. That means they should not have any previous prosecutions, criminal record, negative news, any other kind of disciplinary actions against them in their respective professions. So this criteria is quite wide, and there is a Monetary Authority of Singapore notice on fit and proper criteria. So you can search that on Google and go through it. There are lots and lots of criteria written under it. Additional requirement is that this director should have a relevant experience and educational background to satisfy and truthfully justify their role and responsibilities. The next requirement is about compliance function. You must implement in-house compliance function either for a standard payment institution or for major payment institution. This need not be entirely of new people recruited in Singapore. It can even be done by your head office in case you are a company from some other jurisdiction starting operations in Singapore. But in-house compliance function is necessary and the CV of the compliance officer needs to be submitted at the time of application. You need to have necessary policies prepared and implemented. Those refer to AML and CFT, enterprise-wide risk assessment, technology risk management, cyber hygiene, and there can be additional policies depending upon your specific situation. And lastly, you need to have an independent audit function. This independent audit function can be done either by your head office or by an independent professional firm like ours. This is essentially the audit of your compliance function only. So, this is not an audit of your financial results or management results. It is basically to check your compliance policies and how you are implementing those. So with this, I complete this part 1 of this presentation, and in part 2, I will explain about the documentation and application procedures. Thank you.
Singapore Compliance is a leading financial regulatory consultancy service provider. For any financial licensing application, advisory and audit requirements, please feel free to contact us.